What in under the goodness are you doing?
Do you not recognise the picture? Mary Jane.
Mary Jane, never met her.
I used to go out with Mary Jane a number of years ago.
A great number of years ago.
Well, no, that doesn't matter. I never forgot her. And I have a poem about her.
A poem?
Yes, I have. And I'm going to... Do you want to hear it?
I'll have no option.
Well, Mary Jane. I never managed to forget the first night that I spoke to Mary Jane. We were sheltering under a navy bush from a heavy shower of rain. It's not that I didn't know her, we were neighbours all our life. And of all the other lasses, it was her that I wanted for a wife. But I could never see the answer, for I was a kind of shy, you see. I and Mary Jane was quiet enough, very much like me. But there we were together, both soaking to the skin, and the only thing that made a sound was the rain and constant din. Come on now, John, start speaking. Me heart, it seemed to say, if you love the girl beside ye, now's the chance to make your play. So I pulled myself together and sort of read me throat. Says I, Mary Jane, would you like to share me coat? Well, I had the strangest feeling, sort of shaking at the knees, when she turned and gave me the kindest smile, saying, "A wool, if you please." Well, she snuggled in beside me like a child into her mother, and we soon found out our feelings were the same for one another. Well, that night we started courting in an innocent sort of way, but it wasn't long till the date was set for our wedding day. Boys, I was the proudest man in Ireland, that cannot be denied, as we marched down the centre aisle with Mary Jane along beside. Sure, the whole parish was out to greet us on the day that we were wed, and bestowed on us great wishes for the years that lay ahead. Then to our little cottage, specially whitewashed for the day, arm in arm, Mary Jane and me, we promptly made our way. But when we reached inside the kitchen, by God, she started acting damnable strange. Her voice, that was like an angel, seemed to take a sudden change. She got into a sort of a tantrum as she paced the parlour to and fro, and tell me certain places where I could and couldn't go. I felt a wee bit puzzled. I was in a state of shock. I felt a bit like Moses as he stood upon the rock. But just for the Holy Sacrament that was only 3 hours old, I decided that I'd hold my tongue and do what I was told. Well, the next 3 weeks were awful. She made me feel so small. She had me for a skivvy and every beck and call. So says I, "Now, John, you're acting like a mouse. It's time you told this tizzy who wears the trousers in the house." So says I, "Now, Mary Jane, if you think it wrong or right, I'm going for my usual bottle of stout on the Saturday night. And you simply have to realise, in this house, I am the boss." Well, with that, she resin split me with the frying pan. But that didn't stop me drinking. No, not even with the stitches in me head. If she's going to stop me drinking, she may tie me in the bed. Well, boys, the crack was powerful with me friends that hadn't changed. I'd have stayed with them till the morning if it could only be arranged. But when the pub had closed and things won't be getting any worse. I've a half an hour or two to spend underneath that same ivy bush. For from that spot across the meadow, I can see her at the window. And I know well if I'd go in, there'd be an awful shindy. So I'll sit and count the stars above until the light goes out. Aye, and I'll give her another half an hour or so, just in case of any doubt. And when I'm sure that she's in bed and lying fast asleep, into my little parlour so quietly I'll creep. And as I lay foundered on the sofa, one thought comes in me head when I think of that vicious monster that's lying in my bed. I'm reminded of the winter night as a lump comes in my throat. If I knew then what I know now, I'd never have lent me overcoat. Thank you.
Well, do you know, Cousin Pat, romance is still coursing through your cold old veins.
Oh, God, I'll tell you, it's one thing I don't think it ever dies in a man.
What's that?
Romance.
Romance. Well, talking about romance, I have just finished a poem. It's a very romantic poem, Cousin Pat, and it's a poem I'm going to warn you about. You're not to dare ever to learn it and recite it with strong drink taken before or during. That mightn't suit you with your love of S-T-O-U-T. It's called When Melly Met Nelly. When Melly met Nelly.
I tell you, it's more like a tongue twister.
Blah, blah. You're right. When Miley met Nelly, his legs turned to jelly, his heart palpitated, he stood in a trance, he sailed against her and standing for Leinster, says Nelly O'Kelly, do you want to dance? Now Nelly O'Kelly had called it the Ceili with dreams of romance that never came true, so Ceili quite shyly says Nelly to Miley, oh really I do. Miley moved nearer to Nelly to squeeze her, says Nelly to Miley, you're making too free, you'll do no such a thing until I get a ring, so it's not on your Nelly, says she. So Nelly and Miley stepped out for a while, chancing romancing at dances and do's, says Miley to Mammy, now Mammy, you've met me a lump of a lassie near lovely as you. As happy as Larry, says Miley, now marry me, Nelly O'Kelly, the love of me life, well she hummed and she had and she had and she hummed, to finally succumb to be Miley's wife. So Miley O'Reilly was married in style, with Nelly O'Kelly as his blushing bride, says Father McMelly to Nelly O'Kelly, do you promise to cherish this yahoo by your side? Nelly eyed Miley incredibly slyly, waiting for badness for a minute or two, then thumped her big lump with a dint of a dunt, saying, O'Reilly, I do. So Nelly and Miley lived happy and entirely, with a clatter of children cluttering the floor. There was Packy and Jackie and Remy and Jimmy and Florence and Lawrence and 2 or 3 more. Says Miley O'Reilly to Nelly O'Kelly, tell me now, Nelly, do you love me too? Says Nelly O'Kelly to Miley O'Reilly, O'Reilly, I do, bum bum.
Aha. Well, I tell you, it was a big enough job writing it, but to recite it is harder. Oh, hello.
Hello, Pat, Sonny. Made a loaf of bread for you there.
Oh, sorry.
I was making it this morning, I thought I'd drop one by.
And you make this yourself?
Did I?
Lord, you know, this is one of my most favourite nieces. Because, hey, come here, me and him sitting here, and I'm scundered listening to him going over some of the stuff that he writes. Would there be any chance you'd give us a wee tune or a tin whistle?
Okay, yeah. Sure,
Oh,
I'm here,
you
might
will.
as well,
Here,
aye.
sit down there, would you? Good, look. What, is that the one you
Wee
want?
one there,
Yes, all right,
perfect.
then. You're happy enough there?
Happy enough here, Paddy?
That's all right.
Aye.
Right.
There you go.
God, you can handle that yoke of a thing, see? Indeed. Go on, you'll give us another one.
Jeepers, another wee tune. Sure.
You will.
Sure, I'll do another, let me think what I'll do now. I'll do a wee jig, maybe.
Very good. You wouldn't need to be much longer, your lungs for the like of that. You know this. Never mind that. This boy thinks he's the only one that writes a bit of poetry. But I was sitting down the other night, not often, but I was thinking about what happens whenever you go out of this world, you know. And we got this thing came into my head, and I couldn't get stopped until I got it wrote. And I titled it The Letter. So whether he likes it or not, Jerry, I'm going to give it to you. I got a letter the other day. It seemed to come from far away. I didn't recognize the stamp. The address was faded and kind of damp. I opened it up. The letter said, "This is from a friend you knew is dead. I made it to heaven, as you now can tell. A whole lot of other folks turned left for hell. It's not bad up here, but there's nobody I know. Only Jesus and Mary and his stepfather Joe. There's Peter and Patrick and Matthew and James. Aye, and a whole lot of other saints with rare, funny names. But on the right, as I came through the door, there's a great big book with names galore. I searched for years, and to my dismay, it was in wee fine print in a kind of grey. I got another letter a few days later. Well, it was sort of dried up like burnt up paper. I opened that up. Well, that sort of fell apart. And this is how it did start. This is from a friend you knew so well. I took a left turn and went to hell. It's not bad down here. There's a whole lot of folk I know, like Bridget and Mary and Marilyn Monroe. They're drinking and gambling round this big fire, 2 bags of coal and a rubber tire. But on the left, as I came through the door, there's a great big book with names galore. I searched for years, and to my dismay, there it was as bright as day, in big bright print and written in red. I'm sure of him the day he's dead. So I'll finish off now, my dear friend. Be very careful going round the bend, and change your ways, whatever you do, for the road to the right is the road for you, and the road to the left you'll surely rue. Thank you very much.
Cousin Pat,
You didn't think I could write stuff like that?
the only one thing I can say about that is I hope you take your own advice. You know, I was listening to this young girl playing her music, and you know, the words of Shakespeare came into my head, as they often do, Cousin Pat.
Oh, Shakespeare.
If music be the food of love, play on. Love. Where would you be without it, Cousin Pat? Well, you've been without it for quite a long time.
Go on ahead.
I was thinking about writing a poem about a beautiful actress with the lovely flaming hair. Her name is Maureen O'Hara. And you know, Cousin Pat, when I write poems, the rhymes, they sometimes don't come easy because there's some words that don't rhyme, as I've discovered listening to your poems at times. But they say there is one word in the English language that can't be rhymed, but I discovered that there's another one. Can you tell me any rhymes for O'Hara?
O'Hara. Well, you to go with it's a Tara.
Say no more. This is called The Man Who Loved Maureen O'Hara.
Boys, it's a Tara.
I'll tell you the story of Packy McCrory, who lived near the foot of our lane. He was a pure holy Tara for Maureen O'Hara and dreaming of being John Wayne. His obsession begun in the year 61 after dandering one evening to town when he juked in from the street to the picture house heat as the rain and the sleet pelted down. There, doused in Jay's fluid, fleas chomped and fleas chewed as Packy sucked on a cinnamon sweet. Warm, dry and content, it was tuppence well spent, so he settled himself down for a sleep. But he never supposed, as he snuffled and dozed, that his world would soon turn around, for like the prophet of old, he had just travelled the road towards Damascus. No, towards sweet Omi town. Packy was jolted awake by a creak in his neck which snapped him out of a dream, and as he opened his eyes, his jaw fell with surprise as he gazed at the face on the screen. Bewitched and beguiled by her shy, roguish smile, Cupid pricked Packy's heart with an arrow, and he was swept off that seat in the cinema heat and fell in love with Maureen O'Hara. Clambering home by moonlight, he resolved that cold night to build a shrine to his Hollywood queen. He whitewashed his grey home and made his own white morn, painting the door an emerald green. He was a familiar sight on his old tandem bike, traversing the rocks of our lane as he crowed in his free as loud as could be in an accent he stole from John Wayne. For 35 years, Packy choked back the tears when he thought of the girl of his dreams. None else could compare with her beauty so rare. He only had eyes for Maureen. At a late evening dance, a lassie hinted romance, says the redhead, "Will I see the Mara?" Packy sadly replied, a wistful look in his eyes, "Nah, you're nice." but you're no Maureen O'Hara. As he draped his coat over the white marble shoulder of a Madonna in the old ruined church, a storm fizzled and blew and soaked Packy through as he shivered in his white cotton shirt. Distant relatives prayed as he lay on his bed, while his life ebbed away like a stream. Tears glistened his eyes as he silently sighed and hoarsely whispered the name, Maureen. He was buried alone neath a grey granite stone, having ploughed his lonely furrow neath this legend and story. Here lies Packy McCrory, the man who loved Maureen O'Hara. Da 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 dum da dum da 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 da. Beautiful. Well, all their wars were merry and all their songs were sad, Cousin Pat.
Well, you see there when you're chatting about rhyming and you can't get a word. There's a word, ostrich. Now, there was a boy, Mick, from up outside Armagh, and somebody asked Mick to write a poem about an ostrich. And Mick thought for a minute, and by God he did. And he started the sentence off with ostrich, so he didn't have to look for a word to rhyme with ostrich. That just reminds me of down in our country, there was a wee boy who wrote a bit of poetry as well. It was Charlie Kearney. Now, there was a boy who used to come into Charlie's for a wee half pint, and it was the same story about the poetry. He looked at him, his name was McAnespy, and he thought he'd Charlie cornered. And he says to Charlie, you're writing about dogs and cats and horses and everything round the country, but you'll never write a poem about McAnespy. Charlie looked up at him. He says, McAnespy's nose is red. McAnespy's nose is low. It'd be no disgrace to McAnespy's face if half of his nose was gone. And that just brings me round to Charlie. Now, you're on about love and romance.
All the time, Cousin Pat, all the time.
Well, there's a boy out in our country, he was Red Frank. Now, that was all he ever got, was Red Frank. And Red Frank had 14 hens. And he was in love with these 14 hens. I'm telling you. But lo and behold, there was one morning he got up and there was only 9 hens left. And now it wasn't a very pleasant morning.
No.
And he knew himself that the fox had been there that night. And he didn't know what he was to do. And he knew when the fox starts, the fox will raid you out and you'll have nothing. So he's due to collect his pension down in the post office, that's down below me under. And he went down and he went in and he said to the post office man, would there be a hen man about the country? He says, I know nothing about hen men. He says, go down to Charlie Kearney. He says, you go down here after you left the pension and ask Charlie about the henman, he'll tell you everything. So that was good enough. He went down and he orders a wee half pint, and after a minute he says to Charlie, Charlie, would there be henmen about the country still? Aye, why? Och, he says, I got up this morning, he says, and the fox had 6 of my best hens going. And he says he'll not quit till he reads them all out. He says if I could get a hen man, he'd give me a wheen of pounds for them and have no more hassle. So he told him about a boy from Fentona direction, and he would send him up in that up to where Red Frank lived. So happened the following Monday morning about 11 o'clock did the hen man walk in, and he told him the story about Red Frank. He says, where does this man live? And if you knew where Red Frank lived, it was way up a long, narrow lane, and once you left the lane, you crossed a wheel of fields, and you reached Red Frank's house. So he sent him in that direction. Not much more happened. The following Thursday, Red Frank landed back in, and he ordered his half pint. And Charlie says to him, well, it's not none of my business, but he says, did the hen man call with you for I sent him up? He says he did. There wasn't much more said. Well, he says, I hope, he says, he treated you well enough. But he says, it was me sent him up to you, he says. Well, he says, to tell you the truth, the only difference in him and the fox was he didn't eat the bottom of the door. And that's a true story.
Well, that is a good one.
Yes.
That is a good one. Well, no harm to the company. It is time I have to do a little errand. Oh, I am a man of errands. I am an important man. I have someone to see, so I'll catch up with you later, and loved your music.
And you're for off now?
I'm for off, and I'll see you when I see you, which will be in a short while.
Good luck.